The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as 7-year-old Marcus clutched his mother's hand tightly. The massive stone walls seemed to reach up to the clouds, making him feel smaller than he already was. His mother, Alina, wore her finest dress. But Marcus could see the worry lines around her eyes that had appeared weeks ago when the letter arrived. "Remember what I told you?" Alina whispered, kneeling down to adjust Marcus's collar. "Must be brave today. Your father would be proud of you." Marcus nodded, though his stomach felt like it was full of butterflies. He had never been to the palace before, and everything about it felt overwhelming. The guards in their shining armor, the servants hurrying about their duties, and the grand entrance doors that were 3 times taller than his father had been. Alina had explained the situation as best she could to a child. His father, Captain Thomas, had served the king faithfully for 15 years. He had died protecting a village from bandits, saving dozens of families but leaving behind his own wife and son with very little money. The king, moved by Thomas's sacrifice, had granted them an audience to discuss a pension for the widow and child as they walked through the corridors. Marcus's eyes grew wide at the tapestries depicting great battles and the portraits of stern-looking nobles. His shoes made soft clicking sounds on the marble floor, and he tried to walk as quietly as possible, afraid that any noise might get him in trouble. "Stop here," commanded a tall royal guard with a deep voice. His armor gleamed in the torchlight, and a long sword hung at his side. The guard's face was hidden behind a metal helmet, but his eyes were visible through the slots. They looked cold and unwelcoming. Alina straightened her shoulders and spoke with as much dignity as she could. "Gather. We are Alina and Marcus Thompson. We have an appointment with His Majesty regarding my late husband's service." The guard looked down at a scroll in his hands, then back at them. "You're early, wait here." He pointed to a wooden bench against the wall. "Do not move from this spot until called." They sat on the hard bench, and Marcus swung his legs back and forth, unable to reach the floor. Other people passed by, important-looking men in fancy clothes, ladies in beautiful gowns, and more guards. Some glanced at the simple woman and her small son with curiosity, others with what looked like pity. Time seemed to move very slowly. Marcus watched the guards change positions, noticed how they marched in perfect formation, and observed their serious expressions. He had always been fascinated by soldiers because of his father's stories, but these men seemed different from how his father had described royal guards. They seemed colder, less kind. After what felt like hours, Alina checked the small timepiece. That had belonged to her husband. "We've been waiting for 3 hours," she murmured to herself, then looked around for someone to ask about their appointment. A different guard approached. This one even more intimidating than the first. His beard was gray, and scars marked his weathered face. "You're the Thompson woman?" he asked gruffly. "Yes, sir. We've been waiting for our audience with the king." The guard frowned and shook his head. "There's been a change. His Majesty is dealing with urgent state matters. Your petition has been postponed indefinitely."
Alina's face went pale.
"But we traveled for 3 days to get here, used the last of our savings for this trip. Surely there must be some mistake." "No mistake. The king has more important matters than dealing with every widow who comes begging." The guard's words were harsh, and Marcus saw his mother's hands tremble. "Please," Alina said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My husband died serving this kingdom. We just need a few minutes to explain our situation." The guard's expression didn't change. "You have 2 choices. Leave now, or be escorted out by force. The decision is yours." Marcus looked up at his mother and saw something he had never seen before: complete despair. Her eyes filled with tears, and her shoulders began to shake. This was the woman who had been so strong after father died, who had comforted him when he cried, who had worked day and night to try to make ends meet. Now she looked broken. The injustice of it all filled Marcus with anger he didn't fully understand. His father had told him stories about the kind and fair king who cared for all his subjects, but this didn't seem kind or fair at all. His mother had done nothing wrong. His father had died protecting people, and now they were being turned away like they didn't matter. As Alina slowly stood up, accepting defeat, Marcus remained seated. Something inside him refused to accept this treatment. He thought about his father's last words to him. Take care of your mother, son. Be brave when others cannot be. The guard was already walking away when Marcus made his decision. He slipped off the bench quietly, while his mother gathered her small bag with shaking hands. She was too upset to notice that her son was no longer beside her. Marcus had watched the guards all morning and had noticed something important. Behind the pillar, where the mean guard had been standing, there was a small door that servants used. He had seen them come and go, carrying trays and messages. If he could get through that door, maybe he could find someone who would listen. Maybe he could reach the king himself. His heart pounded as he crept toward the pillar. Staying close to the wall and moving when the guards weren't looking, the small door was slightly open, and through it he could hear voices and the clatter of dishes. This was his chance. Taking a deep breath, Marcus squeezed through the narrow opening and found himself in a busy kitchen. Servants rushed about preparing food, and the warm air was filled with the smell of bread and roasting meat. No one noticed one small boy who didn't belong there. He knew he had to move quickly before his mother realized he was gone. In this vast palace was a king who needed to know that good people were being treated badly by his guards. Marcus's father had taught him that sometimes being brave meant doing what was right. Even when you were scared, the little boy was about to make the most important move of his young life. The palace kitchen was a maze of activity that both thrilled and terrified Marcus. Steam rose from giant pots, and the heat from multiple ovens made his face flush. Servants wearing white aprons moved quickly between wooden tables covered with vegetables, meat, and freshly baked bread. The noise was overwhelming, chopping, sizzling, shouting orders, and the clatter of metal pots and pans. Marcus pressed himself against the wall, trying to stay invisible while figuring out his next move. He had never seen so much food in one place. At home, his mother carefully counted every coin before buying their simple meals, often skipping her own dinner to make sure he had enough to eat. You there? A stern voice cut through the kitchen. Noise, what are you doing in my kitchen? Marcus turned to see a large woman with flour on her hands and a fierce expression on her round face. This had to be the head cook, and she did not look pleased to find a strange child in her domain. I'm sorry, Marcus stammered, his brave plan suddenly seeming very foolish. I need to find the king. The woman's expression softened slightly. At his honest answer, the king, child. You can't just wander around the palace looking for his majesty. Before Marcus could answer, a younger servant girl approached. She had kind eyes and couldn't have been much older than 16. Mrs. Hartwell, maybe we should hear what he has to say. He looks scared. Mrs. Hartwell, the head cook, wiped her hands on her apron and knelt down to Marcus's level. What's your name, boy? And why do you need to see the king so desperately that you'd sneak into my kitchen? Marcus's words tumbled out in a rush. My name is Marcus Thompson. My father was Captain Thomas Thompson, and he died protecting people from bandits. My mother and I came here because we were promised an audience with the king, but the guards were mean to us and sent us away. My mother is crying and we don't have any money left. I just thought maybe if I could talk to the king myself, he would understand. Mrs. Hartwell and the servant girl exchanged glances. The cook's expression grew thoughtful. Thompson ... I remember hearing about a Captain Thompson who died saving villagers near the eastern border. Brave man? Yes, Marcus said eagerly. That was my father. He always told me the king was good and fair, but the guards weren't good or fair at all. The servant girl, who had introduced herself as Sarah, crouched down beside Marcus. The guards can be difficult sometimes, but the king really is a good man. The problem is reaching him. He's surrounded by advisors and officials who decide who gets to see him. Mrs. Hartwell stood up, her face showing the internal battle. She was fighting. Boy, what you're asking is dangerous for all of us. Servants who interfere with palace business can lose their jobs or worse. But, she paused, looking at Marcus's hopeful face. Your father's sacrifice deserves better than this. What are you thinking? Sarah asked quietly. The king always takes his afternoon walk through the rose garden. He goes there to think, usually alone, except for one guard. It's the only time he's truly accessible. Mrs. Hartwell bit her lip. If someone were to accidentally be in the garden at the same time, ... double quotes, Marcus felt hope rising in his chest. Could you help me get there? Mrs. Hartwell looked around the kitchen, then back at Marcus. I must be getting old and soft-hearted. Sarah. Take the boy to the servants' quarters. Get him cleaned up and give him some food. He looks half-starved. As Sarah led him through narrow corridors that most palace visitors never saw, Marcus marveled at this hidden world. The servants' areas were much simpler than the grand halls he had seen earlier, but they felt warmer and more welcoming. People nodded at Sarah and smiled at Marcus, though they looked curious about why a child was with her. In a small room filled with simple beds, Sarah found clean clothes that approximately fit Marcus. These belonged to a cook's son who outgrew them, she explained. You'll blend in better if you don't look like a visitor. She also brought him a bowl of thick soup and fresh bread. Marcus ate hungrily, realizing he hadn't had a proper meal since before they left home. While he ate, Sarah explained more about the palace and how it worked. The king is actually very kind, she said, but he's surrounded by people who think they know what's best for the kingdom. Some of the guards and advisors believe that showing kindness to one person means hundreds more will come asking for help. They try to protect the king from difficult decisions by making those decisions for him. But that's not fair, Marcus said between bites of bread. No, it's not, but that's how things work sometimes. The powerful people make rules that help them stay powerful, and regular people suffer for it. Sarah's voice carried a sadness that seemed too old for her young face. When Marcus finished eating, Sarah led him through more hidden passages until they reached a small door that opened onto the palace gardens. The contrast was stunning, from the narrow, dim corridors to an explosion of color and sunlight. Roses of every shade imaginable climbed trellises and filled carefully tended beds. The air smelled like flowers and fresh grass. The king will walk this path in about an hour, Sarah whispered, pointing to a white gravel walkway that wound between the flower beds. Hide behind that large rose bush there. When you see him coming, step out politely and ask for a moment of his time. But Marcus... Her voice became serious. If this goes wrong, if you're caught, you must promise never to mention that anyone helped you. Can you do that? Marcus nodded solemnly. I promise. And Sarah, thank you. You and Mrs. Hartwell are the kindest people I've met since my father died. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. Your father raised a good son. Now go hide, and remember, be respectful but honest. The king appreciates both. As Marcus crouched behind the large rose bush, his heart pounded with a mixture of fear and determination. Through the branches, he could see the beautiful garden stretching out before him. Butterflies danced among the flowers and birds sang in the trees. It was peaceful and lovely, but Marcus couldn't enjoy it while thinking about his mother, probably still crying on that hard bench. Time passed slowly. Marcus watched gardeners work quietly in distant parts of the garden, their movements careful and practiced. He saw other servants hurry past on various errands, none of them noticing the small boy hidden among the roses. Then he heard footsteps on the gravel path, slow, measured steps accompanied by the heavier tread of boots. Through the rose branches, Marcus caught his first glimpse of the king he had heard so much about. The man was younger than expected. With kind eyes but tired shoulders that seemed to carry a heavy burden, walking beside him was a single royal guard, different from the harsh men Marcus had encountered earlier. This guard looked alert but relaxed, and his face showed intelligence and compassion rather than cold duty. Marcus took a deep breath, remembering his father's lessons about courage. This was his moment. Everything depended on what happened in the next few minutes. His mother's future, their survival, and perhaps even his father's legacy hung in the balance. The little boy prepared to step out from his hiding place and change everything. As the king and his guard approached, Marcus could hear their quiet conversation drifting through the garden air. The king was speaking about the difficulties of ruling, the weight of making decisions that affected thousands of lives, and his constant worry about being truly just and fair to his people. Sometimes I wonder, Captain Williams, If I'm really reaching the people who need help most, the king said, pausing to examine a particularly beautiful white rose. I hear reports from my advisors, but I feel disconnected from the real struggles. My subjects face the guard. Captain Williams nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps, Your Majesty, the formal channels sometimes filter out the voices that most need to be heard. Marcus's heart raced as he listened. This was exactly what Sarah had meant. About the king being different from his harsh advisors. The man walking just a few feet away seemed genuinely caring and troubled by the possibility that he might not be helping those who needed it most. Taking the deepest breath of his 7 years, Marcus stepped out from behind the rose bush. His legs felt shaky, but he remembered his father's words about being brave when others could not be.
Your Majesty,
Marcus said quietly, his voice trembling only slightly. Both men stopped abruptly. Captain Williams's hand moved instinctively toward his sword, but the king held up a gentle hand to stop him. The king's eyes widened in surprise at seeing a small boy in servant's clothing standing alone in his private garden. Hello there, the king said kindly, crouching down to Marcus's eye level. You're not one of the regular garden boys, are you? What's your name, child? My name is Marcus Thompson, Your Majesty. My father was Captain Thomas Thompson.
X.
Marcus spoke as clearly as he could, trying to sound brave like his father had taught him. The king's expression changed immediately. Recognition flashed in his eyes, followed by concern and curiosity. Captain Thompson. Yes, I remember signing the letter about his heroic sacrifice. He saved an entire village from bandits, didn't he? But what are you doing here, Marcus? And where is your mother? Marcus felt tears starting to form, but he blinked them back. She's waiting on a bench by the main hall, Your Majesty. We came here because your letter said we could have an audience, but the guards were mean to us. They said you had more important things to do than talk to every widow who comes begging. They told us to leave or be thrown out. The king's face darkened with anger, but Marcus could tell the anger wasn't directed at him. Captain Williams stepped forward, his own expression showing displeasure at what he was hearing. Which guard said this to you? Captain Williams asked firmly. Marcus described the 2 guards as best he could, and he saw Captain Williams and the king exchange meaningful glances. The king stood up, his jaw set with determination. Marcus, your father was a hero who died serving this kingdom with honor. You and your mother deserve far better treatment than you receive today. The king's voice carried authority that made Marcus feel safer than he had in weeks. How did you manage to find me here in the garden? Marcus looked down at his feet, suddenly worried he might get Sarah and Mrs. Hartwell in trouble. I just wanted to find you, Your Majesty. Everyone said you were good and fair, and I thought if I could just talk to you, you would understand. The king smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from an adult in a long time. You're quite resourceful, aren't you? Very brave. It took considerable courage to approach me like this. My father always said that being brave means doing what's right, even when you're scared, Marcus replied. Your father was a wise man, as well as a brave one. The king placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. Now let's go find your mother and set this right. But first, I want you to know that what happened to you today was wrong, and it won't happen again. As they walked back toward the main palace, the king asked Marcus about his life since his father's death. Marcus found himself telling the truth about everything. How his mother worked long hours cleaning other people's houses, how they sometimes didn't have enough food, how his mother cried at night when she thought he was sleeping, and how they had spent their last money to come to the palace. I see, the king said thoughtfully. Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman, and you're clearly your father's son. Tell me, Marcus, what would help your family most right now? Marcus thought carefully before answering. My mother needs work that pays enough so she doesn't have to be sad all the time. Maybe we could have a little house where we don't have to worry about having enough money for rent every month. My father always said that people shouldn't have to choose between having a home and having food. The king nodded approvingly. Those are reasonable and thoughtful requests. Your father raised you well. When they reached the main hall, Marcus saw his mother still sitting on the bench where he had left her. But now she wasn't alone. Several guards were standing around her, and she looked frightened and confused. Marcus ran ahead, calling out, Mother. Lena looked up in shock and relief. Marcus, where have you been? I was so worried. Then she noticed the king approaching behind her son, and her face went pale. She quickly stood and attempted to curtsy, nearly losing her balance in her nervousness. Mrs. Thompson, the king said. Warmly, please. There's no need for such formality. I'm the one who owes you an apology. It seems my guards treated you and your son with inexcusable rudeness today. The guards who had been questioning Alina suddenly looked very uncomfortable. Marcus recognized one of them as the mean guard who had dismissed them earlier. Now that guard's face had gone white. He seemed to be trying to make himself invisible. Alina looked confused and overwhelmed. Your Majesty, I don't understand. ... Your son showed remarkable courage today, Mrs. Thompson. He found a way too. Reach me when my own system failed you both. We need to discuss your situation properly, with the dignity and respect that the widow and child of Captain Thompson deserve. Captain Williams stepped forward. Your Majesty, shall I escort Mrs. Thompson and Marcus to the Blue Chamber for a private audience? Yes, and Captain Williams, please see that refreshments are brought. I suspect our guests haven't eaten properly today. The king then turned to the guards who had mistreated Alina and Marcus earlier. His voice became stern and commanding. 3 will report to Captain Williams's office immediately after I finish with the Thompson family. Your conduct today was unacceptable and will be addressed. As they walked toward the Blue Chamber, Alina whispered to Marcus, How did you manage this? What did you do? Marcus looked up at his mother with eyes that seemed older than his years. I remembered what father taught me about being brave, mother. And I met some very kind people who helped me. The king, overhearing, smiled. Indeed he did, Mrs. Thompson. Your son has taught me something important today about how my own palace operates. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the smallest teachers. Marcus felt proud but also relieved. The hardest part was over. He had found the good and fair king his father had told him about, and now everything was going to be different. But he didn't yet realize just how much this moment would change not only his and his mother's lives, but the entire way the palace operated. The Blue Chamber was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Rich tapestries covered the walls, and sunlight streamed through tall windows with colored glass that cast rainbow patterns across the polished wooden table. Comfortable chairs with soft cushions surrounded the table, and Marcus sank into one gratefully, his legs finally able to rest after the long, emotional day. Alina sat stiffly in her chair, still overwhelmed by the sudden change in their circumstances. Just an hour ago she had been preparing to leave the palace in defeat and despair. Now she was sitting across from the king himself, who was speaking to her with genuine kindness and respect. Mrs. Thompson, the king began, I want you to know that I personally signed the letter inviting you here. Your husband's sacrifice was extraordinary. It troubles me deeply that you were treated poorly when you came seeking the help I promised. Alina found her voice, though it still trembled slightly. Your Majesty, we are grateful for your time. I know you must be very busy with important matters. The king shook his head firmly. There is nothing more important than ensuring that those who serve our kingdom are properly cared for, and that their families are supported when they make the ultimate sacrifice. Your husband died protecting innocent people. That makes supporting you and Marcus one of my highest responsibilities. A servant entered with a tray of food, fresh bread, cheese, fruit, and warm soup. Marcus's eyes widened at the feast, and the king noticed his reaction. Please, eat while we talk, the king encouraged. Suspect you've had a long journey and little food today. As Marcus and Alina ate, the king asked detailed questions about their situation. He wanted to know about their home, Elena's work, their daily expenses, and their hopes for the future. Unlike the guards who had dismissed them. The king listened carefully to every answer and asked thoughtful follow-up questions. You mentioned that you clean houses for work, the king said to Alina. That must be very difficult, especially while grieving your husband and caring for Marcus. Alina nodded, her eyes growing sad. It's honest work, Your Majesty, but it doesn't pay very much, and sometimes the people I work for treat me. She paused, glancing at Marcus. They treat you poorly because you need the work, and they know it. The king finished gently. Yes, I understand. It's a common problem that I fear too many nobles ignore. Marcus looked up from his bread. Mother works so hard, Your Majesty. Sometimes she comes home, and her hands are red and sore from scrubbing floors. And she always gives me the bigger portion of food, even when I know she's hungry too. Elena blushed, embarrassed that Marcus had shared such private details, but the king's expression showed admiration rather than pity. Marcus, your mother sounds like a remarkable woman. And Elena, you should be proud of the son you've raised. His courage today shows that he inherited the best qualities from both his parents. After they finished eating, the king leaned back in his chair and spoke thoughtfully. I've been considering your situation, and I believe I have a solution that would honor your husband's memory while providing you both with security and dignity. Elena and Marcus leaned forward, hardly daring to hope. There are several positions here at the palace that would be perfect for someone with your intelligence and dedication. Elena, our head librarian, has been asking for an assistant to help organize and maintain the royal library. It's important work that requires someone who can read and write well, and who can be trusted with valuable books and documents. Elena's eyes widened in surprise. Your Majesty, I can read and write, but I've never worked in a library. The head librarian, Master Edmund, is an excellent teacher who would train you properly. The position comes with good wages, much better than what you're earning now, and it includes living quarters here at the palace for you and Marcus. Marcus couldn't contain his excitement. We would live in the palace. Really? The king smiled at the boy's enthusiasm. Yes, Marcus. And speaking of you, I have something special in mind for your education. Captain Williams has recommended that you be enrolled in the palace school, where the children of nobles and high-ranking officials learn their letters and numbers, along with history, geography, and other important subjects. Lena's hands flew to her mouth in shock. Your Majesty, such an education, we could never afford... It would be provided at no cost as part of your family's compensation for Captain Thompson's service. Every child deserves a proper education, especially the son of a hero. Thought about what this would mean? Real school, with books and teachers, instead of the few lessons his mother had been able to give him in their small, dark room. The chance to learn about the world beyond their struggling existence. But, the king continued, I have one more request that's very important to me. Marcus and Elena waited anxiously. Marcus, I want you to help me with a special project. When today, you showed me that there are problems in my own palace that I didn't know about. Guards who abuse their power. Systems that keep deserving people from getting help they need. I want you to be my eyes and ears among the common people who work and visit here. Elena looked concerned. Your Majesty, Marcus is just a child. Yes, and that's exactly why he's perfect for this job. Adults often don't notice children, which means Marcus could observe things that others miss. And children see the world differently than adults do. They notice unfairness that adults have learned to accept. The king turned to Marcus directly. Would you be willing to help me learn how to be a better king? It wouldn't be dangerous work. Just watching and listening, then telling me what you observe. I want to make sure that what happened to you and your mother today never happens to anyone else. Marcus thought about his father's stories about serving the kingdom and protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. This sounded like a way to continue his father's work even as a child. I would be honored to help, Your Majesty. My father always said that serving others was the most important thing a person could do. Elena wiped away tears that had started flowing during the king's generous offer. Your Majesty, this is far more than we ever dared hope for. How can we possibly thank you? The king stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his kingdom. Mrs. Thompson, your husband died protecting people he had never met, simply because it was the right thing to do. The way to thank me is to continue his legacy of service and honor. Help me create a kingdom worthy of his sacrifice. As the afternoon sun began to set, painting the chamber in warm golden light, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since his father's death: hope for the future. Not just hope for survival, but hope for a meaningful life where he could make a difference. The king turned back to them with a smile. Captain Williams will arrange for your belongings to be collected and brought here. You can start your new positions next week, which will give you time to settle into your quarters and for Marcus to meet his new teachers. Marcus looked at his mother and saw something wonderful in her face. The worry lines were gone. replaced by an expression of peace and gratitude. For the first time in months, she looked truly happy. "Your Majesty," Elena said, "our family will serve your kingdom with the same dedication that Thomas did." "You have my word." The king nodded approvingly. "I have no doubt of that." "And Marcus, remember, your mission starts the moment you move into the palace. Keep your eyes open and your heart compassionate. Help me be the king your father believed me to be." 3 months had passed since that life-changing day in the Blue Chamber, and Marcus had settled into his new life at the palace with remarkable ease. Their quarters were modest but comfortable, 2 connected rooms with real glass windows, warm blankets, and enough space for Marcus to have his own small bed. Most importantly, they never worried about having enough food or a place to sleep. Elena had flourished in her role as assistant librarian. Master Edmund, a kindly older man with a white beard and gentle eyes, had proven to be an excellent teacher. Elena discovered that she had a natural talent for organizing information and caring for books. The royal library was vast, filled with thousands of volumes on every subject imaginable. Elena found herself learning something new every day. Marcus attended the palace school each morning with the children of nobles and officials. At first, the other children had been curious about the boy whose father had died a hero, but soon Marcus was accepted as simply another student. He proved to be bright and eager to learn, quickly mastering reading, writing, and arithmetic. Favorite subjects were history and geography, especially when his teachers told stories about brave people who had made differences in the world. But Marcus never forgot his special mission for the king. During his free time in the afternoons, he wandered through different areas of the palace, observing and listening. What he discovered troubled him deeply. The problem wasn't just with a few mean guards. Marcus realized that there was an entire system in place that kept common people away from those who could help them. Servants were discouraged from speaking directly to nobles about problems they witnessed. Guards were rewarded for turning away visitors rather than helping them. Officials competed with each other to show how efficiently they could handle requests, which usually meant dismissing them quickly rather than investigating thoroughly. Marcus began keeping a small notebook, recording what he saw and heard. He wrote down names, dates, and specific incidents. His careful observations painted a picture of a palace where kindness existed mainly at the top and bottom levels. It was often missing in the middle ranks, where most decisions were made. 1 particularly disturbing incident occurred on a rainy Tuesday morning. Marcus was walking through the main courtyard when he saw an elderly woman struggling with a heavy bag while trying to approach the main entrance. She moved slowly, clearly in pain, and kept looking around nervously, as if unsure where to go. Marcus watched as she approached a guard stationed near the doors. The woman spoke quietly, but Marcus could see her pointing to an official-looking paper in her hands. The guard barely glanced at the document before shaking his head and pointing toward the gate. The woman tried to explain something, her voice becoming more desperate, but the guard turned away dismissively. The elderly woman stood in the rain for several minutes, clearly not knowing what to do next. Finally, she began the slow journey, back toward the gate, her shoulders shaking with either cold or tears. Marcus approached her before she could leave. "Excuse me, ma'am, are you all right? Can I help you with something?" The woman looked down at him with surprise and gratitude. "Oh, you're very kind, young man, but I don't think anyone can help me. I've been trying for weeks to get someone to look at this letter about my pension. My husband served in the Royal Army for 20 years, and I was told I would receive support. After he died, but the payments stopped coming months ago." Marcus felt a familiar anger rising in his chest. "May I see your letter?" The woman handed him a worn piece of paper that had clearly been handled many times. Marcus read it carefully. Noting the official seals and signatures, everything appeared to be in order. This woman definitely deserved help. "Ma'am, I think I know someone who might be able to help you. Would you be willing to wait here for just a few minutes?" The woman nodded hopefully, and Marcus ran off to find Captain Williams. It was learned that Captain Williams was one of the few officials who could be trusted to act with both authority and kindness. Captain Williams listened carefully to Marcus's explanation, then accompanied him back to where the elderly woman waited. After examining her documents, the captain's expression grew stern. "Mrs. Henderson, you are absolutely entitled to this pension. There appears to have been an administrative error that stopped your payments. I will personally ensure this is corrected immediately, and you should receive all the back payments you're owed." The woman began to cry with relief. "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I was beginning to think no one cared." After arranging for Mrs. Henderson to receive immediate assistance and a warm meal, Captain Williams walked with Marcus back toward the main palace. "You did well today, Marcus," Captain Williams said, "but I'm troubled by what this incident reveals. Mrs. Henderson should never have been turned away in the first place." Marcus nodded seriously. "Captain Williams, I've been watching and writing things down like the king asked me to. This isn't the first time something like this has happened." That evening, Marcus requested a private audience with the king. In the same blue chamber where his new life had begun, Marcus opened his small notebook and shared everything he had observed over the past 3 months. The king listened in silence as Marcus described incident after incident of deserving people being turned away, servants afraid to report problems, and officials more concerned with appearing efficient than actually helping citizens. The boy's detailed observations painted a clear picture of systemic problems that went far beyond a few rude guards. "You've done excellent work, Marcus," the king said when the boy finished his report. "This information is invaluable, but I confess it's also deeply troubling. It seems that good intentions at the top aren't enough if the systems in the middle are broken." Marcus looked up hopefully. "Does this mean you can fix it, Your Majesty?" The king smiled at the boy's faith in his abilities. "It means we can try to fix it, Marcus. But it will require more than just giving orders. We need to change how people think about their responsibilities to the kingdom and to each other." Over the following weeks, the king began implementing changes based on Marcus's observations. He started by meeting personally with every guard and official who had positions involving contact with citizens. Rather than simply punishing those who had behaved poorly, he explained his vision of a kingdom where everyone was treated with dignity and respect. The king also created new systems to ensure that citizens' concerns reached the right people. He established regular days when he or trusted officials would be available to hear petitions directly from the people, without layers of bureaucracy in between. He created a position for an ombudsman, someone whose job was specifically to investigate complaints about how citizens were treated by palace officials, but the most innovative change was inspired directly by Marcus's success. The king created a program where children from common families could spend time at the palace, learning about government while also serving as observers and reporters. These children, like Marcus, could move freely through the palace and notice things that adults might miss or ignore. Marcus found himself training these new young observers, teaching them how to watch carefully, listen respectfully, and report accurately. He discovered that he enjoyed teaching and helping others develop the skills needed to identify and address unfairness. One of Marcus's most successful protégés was a 9-year-old girl named Emma, whose father had been a palace gardener before, dying in an accident. Emma had a sharp eye for detail and a gentle way of talking to people that made them feel comfortable sharing their problems. During Emma's second week in the program, she discovered something that even Marcus had missed. She noticed that the kitchen staff were throwing away large amounts of perfectly good food, while knowing that some of the servants, families in the lower quarters, didn't have enough to eat. "It's not that the cooks are mean," Emma explained to Marcus and the king. "They're just following old rules about what to do with leftover food from the nobles' meals. The rules say to throw it away instead of giving it to poor people because someone decided long ago that it wouldn't be proper." This observation led to another policy change. The king established a system where excess food from the royal kitchens was distributed to families in need, both within the palace community and in the surrounding town. What had been waste became nourishment for dozens of families. As months passed, Marcus began to see real changes in how the palace operated. Guards were more polite and helpful. Officials took time to listen to citizens' concerns. Servants felt comfortable reporting problems without fear of losing their jobs. Most importantly, fewer people left the palace feeling hopeless and dismissed. But Marcus also learned that changing systems was easier than changing hearts. Some officials resented the new policies, feeling that their authority had been undermined. A few guards grumbled about having to be soft with commoners. Some nobles complained that the king was spending too much time and resources on trivial matters. The real test of all these changes was about to come in a way that none of them expected. The crisis came on a cold morning in late autumn, nearly a year after Marcus had first stepped out from behind the rose bush to change his family's fate. Word arrived that a large group of refugees was approaching the kingdom's borders, families fleeing from a terrible famine in the neighboring realm. They were hungry, desperate, looking for temporary shelter until they could safely return home. The news created immediate tension within the palace. Some advisors argued that the kingdom couldn't afford to feed and house hundreds of additional people. Others worried that accepting refugees might encourage more to come, creating an overwhelming burden. A few officials suggested turning the refugees away at the border, claiming it would be kinder than letting them in, only to struggle with inadequate resources. Marcus listened to these debates with growing concern, thought about his own family's desperate situation just a year ago, and how different their lives would have been if the king had listened to advisors who thought helping one family wasn't worth the trouble. The king called for a special council meeting to decide how to respond to the refugee crisis. All the major palace officials attended, along with representatives from the army and the treasury. Marcus wasn't invited to the formal meeting, but he positioned himself where he could observe the discussions and the reactions of various officials. What he saw troubled him. Many of the same people who had learned to be polite to individual citizens seeking help were now arguing for turning away hundreds of families in need. It seemed that their improved behavior had been superficial. They had learned to follow new rules, but they hadn't truly changed their hearts. During a break in the council meeting, Marcus approached Captain Williams with his observations. "Captain, I'm worried about what I'm seeing in there. Some of the officials who seem to understand about treating people better are now saying terrible things about the refugees." Captain Williams nodded grimly. "I've noticed the same thing. Marcus, it's easier to be kind to one person than to hundreds. Fear makes people forget their principles. What can we do?" "I think," Captain Williams said thoughtfully, "it's time for you to make another covert move, like you did in the garden that first day." That evening, Marcus requested an urgent private audience with the king, and they met in the Blue Chamber. Marcus was more serious than the king had ever seen him. "Your Majesty, I need to tell you something important about what I observed during the council meeting today." Marcus described in detail the attitudes and comments he had witnessed. He explained how officials who had seemed to embrace the king's vision of compassion were now arguing for policies that contradicted everything they claimed to believe. "They're afraid, Your Majesty. Their fear is making them forget that refugees are people too, just like my mother and I were people who needed help." The king listened carefully, his expression growing more thoughtful with each of Marcus's observations. "You're right, Marcus. And you've identified something I was beginning to suspect myself. It's not enough to change policies and procedures. We need to change how people think about their responsibilities to others. What are you going to do?" The king smiled, and Marcus recognized the look of determination that had appeared on his face that first day in the garden. "I'm going to do something that will either prove that our changes have been real or show us how much more work we still need to do." The next morning, the king made an announcement that shocked everyone in the palace. He declared that he would personally travel to the border to meet the refugees and assess their needs firsthand. More importantly, he invited any palace official who had expressed opinions about the refugee situation to accompany him, so they could see for themselves what they were really discussing. Many advisors tried to dissuade the king from this plan. They argued it was dangerous, undignified, and unnecessary. But the king was firm in his decision. "How can I make good choices about people I've never met? How can my advisors give me good counsel about situations they've never seen?" Royal party reached the border 3 days later. They found a heartbreaking scene. Hundreds of families huddled in makeshift camps, their few possessions piled around them. Children cried from hunger and cold. Parents looked exhausted from weeks of difficult travel. Elderly people struggled with illnesses made worse by poor conditions and inadequate food. Marcus watched as the same officials who had argued for turning the refugees away now saw them as individual human beings rather than abstract problems. He saw one advisor who had been particularly vocal about the kingdom's inability to help. Quietly giving his own warm cloak to a shivering child, the king moved among the refugees, listening to their stories and assessing their needs. Marcus accompanied him, helping to translate for children who were too scared to speak to adults, and observing how different officials reacted to what they saw. One moment stood out above all others. A small girl, probably younger than Marcus, approached the king with a drawing she had made. It showed a simple house with a family standing in front of it, her memory of the home they had been forced to leave behind. "Will we ever go home again?" the little girl asked the king. Marcus watched as the king knelt down to the child's level, just as he had done in the garden that first day they met. "I don't know when you'll be able to go home," the king said gently, "but I promise that while you're here, we'll take care of you and keep you safe. You and your family will have food to eat and a warm place to sleep." Standing nearby, Marcus heard one of the advisors whisper to another, "How can His Majesty make such promises? We don't have resources for all these people." That evening, as the royal party prepared to return to the palace, the king called a meeting of all the officials who had accompanied him. "Today, you've seen what I wanted you to see," the king began. "These aren't numbers on a report or problems to be managed. These are families just like your families, children just like your children, people who have lost everything through no fault of their own." He paused, looking each official in the eye. "Some of you argued that we couldn't afford to help these people, but I ask you this: how can we afford not to help them? What kind of kingdom would we be if we turned away children who are hungry and cold?" Marcus saw several officials looking ashamed of their earlier positions. The king continued, "We will find the resources to help these families because that's what good people do. We'll ask our citizens to contribute what they can. We'll adjust our spending priorities. We'll work harder and be more creative in solving problems. And we'll do all of this not because it's easy, but because it's right." When they returned to the palace, Marcus was amazed to see how quickly things began to change. The same officials who had opposed helping the refugees were now competing to come up with the best solutions. They organized food drives, arranged temporary housing, and coordinated with local communities to share the responsibility of caring for the refugee families. More importantly, Marcus noticed a fundamental shift in how people talked about their work. Instead of focusing on why things couldn't be done, they started focusing on how things could be done. Instead of looking for reasons to say no to people in need, they started looking for ways to say yes. Months later, when most of the refugees were able to return safely to their homeland, they left behind more than just gratitude. They left behind a palace community that had been transformed by the experience of working together to help others. Marcus, now 8 years old and wiser than many adults, reflected on everything that had happened since that first desperate day when he and his mother had come seeking help. He had learned that changing the world required more than just good intentions or even good policies. It required changing hearts, one person at a time. The king had established new traditions based on their experiences. Every month he held open audiences where any citizen could bring their concerns directly to him or his most trusted advisors. The program of young observers continued to grow, with children from all backgrounds helping to ensure that the palace truly served all people. Most importantly, the story of Marcus and the refugees became part of the kingdom's official history, a reminder to future generations about the importance of compassion and courage. Alina continued to flourish as assistant librarian, eventually becoming head librarian when Master Edmund retired. She took pride in maintaining records of all the positive changes that had occurred in the kingdom, creating a library section dedicated to stories of ordinary people who had made extraordinary differences. Marcus grew up to become one of the king's most trusted advisors, specializing in policies that affected common people. He never forgot the lessons he had learned as a 7-year-old boy hiding behind a rose bush, that sometimes the smallest voice can create the biggest change, and that true courage means standing up for what's right, even when you're afraid. The kingdom became known throughout the region for its fairness and compassion, attracting visitors who wanted to learn how to create similar changes in their own lands. And whenever someone asked about the secret to their success, the king would tell them about a little boy who made a covert move that changed everything, not just for his own family, but for an entire kingdom's understanding of what it means to truly serve others.